So if I've planned this out correctly, then you're watching this video in the wake of my Bad News Lovers episode featuring Edward Rochester. And you know that he's pretty much a disaster lover, but he's also one of the most beloved romantic leads in English literature. Now, there are a number of reasons why so many women are obsessed with him and have continued to be obsessed with him ever since Jane Eyre was first published, 150 years ago, thereabouts. And a great deal has to do with how novel the character was when it was first published. A lot of the literature that was published around that time had a real focus on morality. As does Jane Eyre, it says a great deal about sticking to one's values and one's morals, even in the face of extreme sexual and romantic temptation. However, the character of Rochester himself was incredibly different from a lot of the male leads that we were reading at the time, in that he was entirely a creature of desire. And in my opinion, that is what a lot of women respond to, and even men for that matter, because he is such a creature of strong emotions. And he was published in a society that really valued repressing emotions. And as such, he was a fantasy character for both men and women. He made no bones about the fact that he desired Jane, and he desired her completely, body and soul. He wasn't a lech. Well, he was a little bit of a lech. But he truly wanted to possess Jane. It's an extreme of emotion, and the word that a lot of people use to describe Rochester and have continued to use throughout the centuries has been mercurial. He turns on a dime when it comes to his emotions, when it comes to his reactions, and just as Jane doesn't know what to make of him, even you as the reader aren't entirely sure what to make of him. He's an incredibly fascinating character in that he makes no bones about the fact that he has needs and he has desires and he has wants. And he doesn't try to dress himself up to be better than he actually is. In fact, you get this feeling that he actually, he pities himself quite a bit, but he also looks down upon himself and he thinks that he has lived a life that is less than respectable, and he blames other people for it, but he also can't help but look down upon himself for it. And that's a trope that you will see in a great many romance novels even today. The devil-may-care rake who has a secret conscience. But the complexity of Rochester comes in that he never allows any of those pangs of conscience to come in his way when it comes to Jane. And while that's reprehensible, that is also deeply romantic and desirable, for lack of a better word, for a great many women who really are looking, as are, human beings. It's not just a female thing, but human beings, when they are in love, when you think about being in love, it's a consuming emotion. And that's what Rochester is. He is basically trying to consume Jane. He wants every aspect of her, and it is her soul that actually draws him to her. He recognizes parts of her personality that have always been devalued and other people have tried to repress, and he sees value in them. He doesn't just see value in them, in fact, but he treasures them. He's outright greedy for her person and for the soul within that body. And that is a deeply, deeply romantic idea. Now, as you can imagine, that is a very difficult character to play because you need to have a lot of sexual charisma, you need to be You need to be pathetic at 1 second and then dictatorial at another second. You need to be pleading and soft and romantic, but also a complete bastard. And sometimes you're moving from like one emotion to another within a single scene. So to nail that character is nothing less than a feat. And as I was making my Bad News Lovers episode, I realized that I have seen quite a few Jane Eyre adaptations, and I thought I would try to tier rank the ones that I have seen. Now, full disclosure, I have not seen every single adaptation out there, and that is because I know quite a few of them are, pretty generally terrible. Am I really going to watch Charlton Heston be Rochester in an American accent? I don't think so. But of the 6 adaptations that I have seen, I thought that I could do a little tier ranking. Another first for my channel. Now, the very first Edward Rochester that I can remember watching on screen was actually played by Ciaran Hinds. I don't know why this was the first one that I saw, but I have a very strong memory of watching that particular adaptation. Now, Ciaran Hinds has this magnificent face. It basically fills up the entire screen every time he comes on. And it's almost perfect casting for, well, actually I would say it is possibly the best casting for the role, because he has that quality of being almost ugly and yet really charismatic. Like, you see his face all come together and you're like, well, that's not attractive, and yet you think that is attractive. And he can do more with just one expression than most actors can do with like pages and pages of dialogue. There are times when he looks at Jane in this adaptation that make you think that you're actually witnessing something super private, and you kind of feel uncomfortable. And that is exactly what Rochester needs to do. Ciaran Hinds is so good at portraying need that I would actually rank this pretty high up there. My biggest problem, and it sounds really shallow, is that he chose to do this role with like this face foliage on him. I mean, it is just deeply, deeply unfortunate. But for the time being, since he's the only one on the board, I am going to keep him at number 1. Next up is Dilip Kumar, who was a huge star in India in the 1950s and 60s. Actually, he continued acting way into the 90s, but his days as a leading hero, I think, ended sometime in the 70s. But he was, one of the first big bona fide stars of Hindi cinema, and he made this movie called Sangdil in the 1950s that, honestly, if somebody hadn't told me that this was an adaptation of Jane Eyre, I might not have known that it was, because in this version, Jane and Edward are childhood friends who somehow lose sight of each other and then meet again when they're adults, and then the rest of the story is pretty close to the source material. Dilip Kumar has, again, one of those extraordinary faces, and he was one of the great actors of Indian cinema. I'm talking about him like he's passed away. He hasn't. He's still alive. God bless him. But he's one of those actors who impacted the acting style of generations of actors after him. And he has this sort of fake quality to him that is very apt for Rochester. You never know what he is quite thinking, and there seem to be like a million things going on behind his eyes. He's petulant, and he is insistent, and he's entitled. And the entitlement is really what puts me off a little bit, because, in Jane Eyre, Rochester doesn't really feel entitled to Jane. He yearns for her. and he can't quite believe that she might be his and she might love him. Whereas in this version, like he knows he can depend upon her. He knows that he can depend upon her love. And that changes the dynamic between them a little bit. And I don't think it really makes the impact that, otherwise the story should have made. And I don't think this movie did really well either. Like nobody else seems to have watched it. There's like me and my one friend with whom I watched it. They are the only people that I know who've seen it. So yeah, I'm gonna put him at number 2 for now. Next up is the version with Timothy Dalton. Now on paper, I can see why Timothy Dalton was a good choice. He has oodles of sexual charisma, he's very conventionally good looking, the man was James Bond. It was probably a pretty big casting coup when he was cast as Rochester. But here's the thing about Dalton, and you can go back and look at everything from his Bond movies to all the other projects that he's been in, and tell me if I'm wrong, but he is very much a theater actor. I don't know how many of you like to watch plays or go out to the theater, but theater actors, when you are on stage, you need to project. And that's a quality that you need to really rein in and sort of calibrate when you're performing for the camera. And Dalton, in my opinion, has really struggled with that for a very long time. And I don't think he's ever completely been able to restrain himself. I always tell my friends this one story about watching him in, I can't remember the name of the series, and honestly, it's fine, nobody needs to know. But he was playing Julius Caesar in it, and there's a scene in it where they're in a bath. It's a Roman bath, so if you know what that looks like, it's kind of like a swimming pool. And I think Cleopatra is sitting on the side or something, and Julius Caesar has just had one of his victory parades or something, and he's like really amped. And there's a scene or a shot where he comes up under the water. He's sort of like a shark. He comes up under the water and he breaks through the water, and the water just streams off his face, and he opens his eyes and he says, "Victory!" I mean, it's a real choice. But sadly, ever since I saw that scene, I cannot get it out of my head. And now every time I see him, and he loves to choose scenery, like he just goes full ham if you let him. So I've just seen him do these things over the years, and unfortunately, I feel like his Rochester is another one of those. He's just chewing scenery left, right, and center, and it's a very actorly performance, and I don't think that's what Rochester needs. You need to really buy into the misery and the self-pity and the selfishness of that character, and you need to do it at a quieter level because he's generally a psychopath who has learned how to survive in genteel society. And Dalton is way too loud for that. I'm gonna place him above Dilip Kumar, but below Ciaran Hinds. Next up is Orson Welles, who played Rochester in, I think, the 1940s version. Now, I was talking a little while ago about Dilip Kumar having this sort of fey quality to him, and I mean, you want to talk about fey, you really have to take a look at Orson Welles. And if I'm not mistaken, Dilip Kumar really admired him, and I think he might have modeled a bit of his own performances on Welles, who was, again, he was the grand old man of Hollywood. He influenced so many filmmakers and actors in his time, and you can see the amount of thought that he put into this performance. There are shots in this film where you really focus on his eyes, and he's almost an otherworldly character in this. But see, that defeats the purpose, because in Jane Eyre, it is not Rochester who's otherworldly, it is Jane. Rochester is very much a creature of the world. But Jane, with her spirit and her spine and her convictions and her unbending morality, is definitely of another world. And it is that which draws Rochester to her. And also, you know, if you're watching something from the 1940s, it has to be pretty much incredible for a modern viewer to rank it above modern adaptations, because we've definitely, you know, here's the thing, Victorian standards of morality and about how characters in books ought to behave didn't disappear with Queen Victoria. A lot of early Hollywood also had the same ideas, especially after the Hayes Act was enacted. So there's a certain restraint in the portrayal of Rochester when it comes to the Orson Welles version, and I don't think it does it any favors, not on this list. I'm a little bit torn about where to place this, because I think in terms of performance I might prefer the Dilip Kumar version to this, but also the Dilip Kumar version is a less faithful adaptation, so I don't know where to put it. I think I'm gonna do it like a co-fifth place maybe, with Dilip Kumar and Orson Welles. Hey, it's great company. I've been saving the two best for last, and so let's talk about Michael Fassbender. I really enjoy him as an actor. He has a certain menace to him and a sort of restrained ferocity that he brings to a great many of his roles. Even when he is doing something like Hunger or Shame, there's a sort of violence to him that is, you know, you wouldn't want to be in a room with it, but it's very electric on screen. And it works perfectly for Rochester. Fassbender's Rochester is a man who is at war. He flings himself here and there, you know, the way he enters a room, the way he comes into a scene, the way he reacts to Jane, all of it has this undercurrent of violence that is not directed at her, but, you know, at the world. You can almost taste his desperation for her, for another life, to leave Thornton Hall behind and just take refuge in denial. This is a man who will use every trick in the book, who will use every kind of manipulation that he can lay his hands on in order to get what he wants. He's a creature of flesh and he's a creature of want. And he's incredibly hot. I mean, that doesn't hurt him in my eyes, but as per the source text, he isn't supposed to be so handsome. But then, you know, this is what Jane looks like in this adaptation. Not exactly a tiny little mouse, is she? At present, I am going to put this on top of my rankings, but before I can tell you whether this is the definitive #1 spot, I have to discuss Toby Stephens. I have seen people say that Toby Stephens is a sort of unusual choice to play Rochester, and I don't know why. Because he is exactly that kind of like really hot, but also not really cookie cutter handsome that should be playing Rochester. And you guys, he plays it so well. Now, the reason why I am so evangelical about this particular adaptation is because this is perhaps the sexiest Rochester. In all the other versions that I have seen, Mr. Rochester is still, you know, like he is still pretty much a Victorian gentleman when it comes to the way that he treats Jane. But in this particular version, Mr. Rochester really can't keep his hands off her. I don't mean that they have sex, they don't. But the sheer intention with which he makes out with Jane is quite something to witness. If you've been lucky enough to watch Toby Stephens in his other work, then you know that the man is really good in a makeout session. And this particular adaptation of Jane Eyre is where I discovered it for myself. The only real problem is that he plays Rochester more as a traditional upper class fink rather than a man who is basically half driven to madness. He's also the closest that a Rochester on this list has come to becoming a traditional romantic hero. Unlike the Fassbender version, he doesn't really have a sense of menace about him, which is weird because Toby Stephens is really good at portraying menace in a lot of his other characters. But here, he's really restrained that in himself. And you don't really see him as a sexual threat the way that you do in Fassbender's version and that you do in the novel itself, because Jane and he are super into each other. So where does this Toby Stephens adaptation belong? Technically speaking, he should be number 2 because Fassbender's version was possibly more authentic. But as I've said before, a lot of these things are subjective. Reading is subjective, ranking is subjective, my entire channel is subjective. And so for better or for worse, for me, the number 1 Edward Rochester has to be Toby Stephens. That particular adaptation doesn't really have the edge that a lot of the other adaptations have, but it is one of my all-time great comfort watches. I don't have a TV any longer, but if I was watching cable and I had TV and it was playing somewhere, I would definitely 100% stop and watch because I enjoy the heck out of it. I mean, I'll do that for the Fassbender version itself, but I would maybe fast forward through a couple of things. But Toby Stephens, I'll watch him every single time. So that's my definitive ranking. At number 5/6, we have Orson Welles and Dilip Kumar. At number 4, we have Timothy Dalton. At number 3, we have Ciaran Hinds. At number 2, it's Michael Fassbender. And at number 1 is Toby Stephens. Let me know if you have a favorite adaptation or a favorite Rochester. Maybe you like the Mr. Rochester more than the rest of the adaptation. There's all kinds of combinations and permutations that are possible, so let me know in the comments below. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.